right. Everybody, welcome. NorCal Sports Network, and we are privileged today to have the great Ned Colletti, former LA Dodger general manager, and we're going to be discussing trade deadline. So let's get right to it. Welcome, Ned.
Hey, Danny, good to see you, pal.
Yeah, you too, man. You too. This is an exciting time of year. I bet this was pretty exciting and stressful back in your day when you were calling the shots.
It was far more exciting than stressful. It was probably the coolest time of the year, really, except for when you get to the playoffs. But this is a chance for you to make some moves to make your team better. I was fortunate probably the last 25 years of my career that we were always in it, maybe 23 out of 25 years. So you're always looking to get better. Only had a couple of years where we were going to trade a veteran or two, but most of the time we were trying to get better for that year and or for the next year as well. But really an exciting time, and it kind of builds all the way to that last minute when you got a chance to make your team a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the Giants, we got a lot of people here want to know about the Giants. They went 6 games under 500, and then they get really one of the worst teams in all of baseball home 4 games. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, because you win 4 games. Now you think, oh, wow, we're only 2 under 500 and we got a shot. Or do you look at it and say, the team hasn't played well all year, it's Colorado? What do you do as a GM? Do you go into this series and saying you have your mind made up regardless of what happens, or do you say, let's wait and see how we come out of it?
Well, in all due respect, I mean, Colorado's 30 games under 500.
Right.
So, I mean, you better be winning 3, if not 4,
right,
in that matchup. I think the most important thing, I shouldn't say most important, one of the most important things is to be realistic with where your team is at. You can't wish something that's not possible. You've played over 100 games. You know where your team is at. It's not like you just played through the month of April and you played 25, 30 games. And so you're still, waiting to see how it's going to all sort out. After 100 plus games, you kind of know where you're at. And even with the expanded playoffs and wild card situations, you have to be realistic with it. And that's where you got to start. And if you've got a realistic chance, because you got guys coming back, or you think that you're going to get a hot streak going, you sense it through a lot of experience and a lot of time watching it on a daily basis, then maybe you go for it. But if you think your team is got less than a 50-50 chance to get there, and if it gets there, it's going to be a very short period of time, you can't be paying for that opportunity.
Right. Just before the series started, they were 13% playoff chance. They went up to 17.2% after winning the doubleheader yesterday. Even if they win today, there's still probably 20% chance they make the playoffs. They've got to climb over several teams. This is a time to sell, I think.
I agree. Snell's pitched great the last 3-4 times out, especially the last time out. With him having a chance to opt out, you almost, with Scott representing him, you've almost got to believe that he's a free agent. You got to look at him as a free agent, and he can help a lot of clubs. Been to the World Series, has won a couple sides, so he should be the premier starting pitcher if you decide to move him. There's very few pitchers that are going to be available, that might be available, that are of his quality. And I think you've got to look beyond this season. As you say, there's a lot of teams to climb over. To have all those teams lose the day you win over and over and over again, it's tough to do. And those teams they've got a little bit better record through over 100 games. So, it's kind of you hate to do it. I hated doing it. I think I did it twice, as I said, in 25 years. but you have to, you have to look more at the future than you do October.
And let's give a shout out to Jeff Taylor, who's a new member of NorCal Sports Network. Thanks, Jeff. Welcome as a member. Appreciate that. And so what I want to ask you, and a lot of people have been talking about when we get you on, what's it like this time of year with trades? Are you calling somebody, hounding them? Or are you just calling once and then you have a chat? Maybe you've chatted in the winter meetings and now you're getting closer to the deadline and you bring that back up, or how is it? I mean, is it constant calling, or you just is there back and forth? Hey, come on! You said you were going to do this, and now you're pulling back. Is there any of that kind of
Well,
stuff?
you don't. That and that part of the comment never happens. You said you were going to do it. I mean, you're either doing it or you're not.
Right.
A lot of it is groundwork that has been laid, either like you say, winter meetings all the way up until the end of July, or in the last few weeks. When you get to the All-Star break, when you come out of that break, typically people start checking in a little bit more. But it's your responsibility, I feel, to know where everybody's at throughout the course of the season and place calls. And like any other business, you're going to get along better with some than others. You're going to understand everybody, though. You're going to understand how they think. You're going to understand where they're at in their clubs and also in their future, how their ownership looks at things. All those different things you have to gain information little by little by little leading up to this period of time. And I think at this point in time, you're going to know who will and who won't for the most part. The teams that are going to sell off, those teams that have quality players that are going to sell off, they're going to hold the stakes really high, even to this point in time. A day at this time of July is like a week any other time. A lot of things can happen in the course of one day. But until you get to the trading deadline day, that is when everybody's going to show their cards, probably with an hour or two to go. Although there's been a lot of big moves, I think, already made by teams. I think those that are holding out hope that they're going to be able to get one more player, one more prospect, a better prospect. You may not know that until you get right to the end. The last hour and a half, it is nonstop. I had 2 cell phones going and a landline going. And my inner circle in LA, Sabes had his inner circle in San Fran when I was there. And you're in a constant Q&A. You're calling your scouts that are not in the city that you're in. You're calling them to make sure that they, that how they feel about a player. I don't want anybody vacillating. I had one scout. I was talking to him about a pitcher, and I called him like 4 times in a 24-hour period about a certain pitcher. And he says, "Hey, boss, I don't know, I don't want to really come off as thinking that you're forgetful, but you've called me 4 times in the last day." And I says, "Yeah, I know how many times I've called you. Every time I call you, you give me a slightly different answer. I need you to be definitive. As a scout, I need you to be definitive, not go, well, maybe or maybe not, or whoa. This ain't the time of year to maybe or maybe not. This is yay or nay. Tell me what you see. Can this player pitch in the month of October? Can they help us win in the month of October?" Some players are going to help you get to October. Other ones are going to help you get there and also be contributors there. So this last period of time, it's going to go a little bit quicker, a little bit quicker, a little bit quicker. But the last day, in the last couple hours, that's when anybody that's been bluffing, holding out, they will come and play their cards at that point in time.
Interesting.
Until then, you just got to stay in touch, stay with it. You can go on the trade rumor site and read all these things about, well, this is, they're talking. Look, whenever you see anybody that says, they've had conversations about so and so. You read that all the time,
Right.
right? Oh, they've talked about so and so. What does that mean? Hey, Danny, would you trade player X? No, you don't have enough prospects. I'm hanging on to. Well, we talked. That doesn't mean that you would do anything. It just means we
Right.
talked.
Right.
So, we got to pay attention to the English language. We got to pay attention to what people say. Well, they've talked. Well, sure, they've talked. It's, what does that mean? Have they offered? Has the other team said definitively they will move the player? That you don't typically read. Maybe 5% of the time you'll read something that definitive. The rest of the time it's all, well,
How, Ned, how is guys like Jeff Passan and Nightingale, how are they getting the information? Who's putting that out when they hear like, oh, they've talked? Like I heard yesterday, before Chisholm was traded to the Yankees, Marlins and Yankees are in talks. And an hour or 2 hours later, boom, there it is, deal done.
Well, you mentioned, two writers, and there's a handful of them that are just wired in. And there's some that have a network of people, sometimes not the GM, sometimes somebody a little bit down in the ranks that is privy to conversations, and I've seen this happen too. And I'm not naming names or anything like that, but sometimes somebody down the list to feather their own nest, as they say, will give out some information to help them maybe get a GM job down the road. Some of that happens. That's why our inner circles, my Giant days and my LA days, we were a very tight knit group. Part of the rule was you want to be in the room, nothing gets out of this room. And so sometimes though things do get out. And there were times, and I admit to doing this, there were a few writers, not really a few, a couple, that I really, really had great relationships with, and I trusted implicitly. And so when they called me on something, I would never tell anybody a lie or fib, so to speak. I sometimes say, look, I can't get into that. You're going to have to, do more homework or get a little bit deeper from somebody else. Not going to be me. But there were a couple writers that I trusted implicitly. In fact, I just talked to one of them the other day. We always talked at this time of the year. I mean, we talked all year long, but we really talked a lot, sometimes 3 or 4 times a day during this time of the year. And I would tell them, I'd say, look, you want information? I'll give you some information. I'm not going to give you information on my club, but I'll give you some information on somebody else. But I need you to find out, we're hunting this player or these 2 or 3 players. We're hunting these guys. So I need you to find out who's in on them, what the chances are that they're going to make a move, what the chances are that of who the prospect or the players are that are going to be involved in it. And I trade off information. I think probably everybody does it, but I had some people that I could really, really trust. And, I tell them, hey, I'll get you what you need, but I need something in return. And so I'm sure that goes on this day, but you can't do that with everybody. You do it with people you've got long-standing friendships with and relationships, and people you really trust that they're not going to violate the confidence, that they're going to be honest with what they bring back, and they trust you to be honest with what you're coming forward with. So that would happen once in a while. That's how you get some.
Yeah.
But if you read, all the trade rumors and all those things, if anybody ever kept track of all of that,
gosh, yeah, I've had
and saw the percentage of what actually happened, it might be 5 or 10%.
Yeah, I've had so many people email me, friends that email me these trade rumors. I told them, I don't even read them anymore because they're not, none of them come true. So I don't waste my time on them. People, we play on this show, we create trades, but they're just, what we think would be a good trade. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. Now there's 30 GMs out there. When in your day, is there guys that you feel like, man, I better go after this guy because I know he's going to go after him, and I got to be maybe a little bit more aggressive?
Well, a little bit, but it's. I don't think you can chase other teams' moves. I think if you really want a player and you know for a fact, as much as you can know for a fact that that other teams are talking to them, and but you really want, regardless if they're in your division or in your league or whatever, you've got to do what's best for your club, and that comes first. To make reactionary moves because somebody else made a deal or somebody else is talking to a team, so I'm going to get involved because somebody else is going to do it. You can't do that. You can't chase that. It's too hard to make deals to begin with. And I don't think you can spend any capital, whether it's prospects or finance, to just chase another team's reaction. You can't.
Yeah.
You have to know, again, it goes back to the first thing I said. You got to be honest with where your team is at and who can help your team, who can truly help your team, whether it's for the next 2 or 3 months or whether it's for the next 2 or 3 months and another season or two. You got to be honest with yourself. If you have visions of grandeur that are impossible, you're not doing your due diligence. You're not really doing your organization any favors.
Right.
You
Absolutely.
go with that. It means you can't chase either.
Got a couple comments here. Cap says Ned Colletti is awesome. Yes, he is. We love having him on the show.
Thanks, Cap.
Now, here's a question, or not a question, I guess, in imploring. Ned, come back to the Giants. We need a Pobo. Let's go. Ned,
George.
I know the Giants, you can't comment too much on the Giants have a president of baseball operations, but in a hypothetical world, if the Giants came calling and said they want to change directions and they said, Ned, would you be interested? Would you consider?
Danny, I'm not going there.
Okay.
So somebody else that I respect.
I know. Yeah. Farhan's got a job and you're not going to say,
I'm not, I don't play that. I don't play that.
I understand. But
I love the Giants. I love San Francisco, and some of my greatest days of my career were spent there. So a lot of good friendships, a lot of good relationships, but
I get it. I know it's just, but just people want to know, and we'll throw that out there. But so the Giants are right now, they're winning 3-2 in the bottom of the sixth. So got 3 more bats for the Rockies to try and win, see what happens today. But as you said, you've got to really have made up your mind going into this series what you're going to do. The situation we talked about with Blake Snell, they've got Blake Snell that's probably the number 1 pitcher on the market that teams want for a World Series run. Then you have some other guys that could opt out, like a Matt Chapman, who's, he's a very, very solid veteran player. I think he's better fit with other teams that have a stacked lineup than like the Giants. He's their cleanup guy, and he's only got like 45, 46 RBIs at this point of the year. If you put him on a team like the Yankees, the Dodgers, I mean, I know the Dodgers have Max Muncy, but he's been out for months. Matt Chapman would be a real big guy for the Dodgers because he would shore up that left side of the infield, and he could bat lower in the order and have some protection actually in that lineup. Do you see a guy like Matt Chapman, Jorge Soler, who's still signed for a couple years? Do you see guys like that getting moved possibly for the Giants?
Well, I think Soler would be tough to move because of what he's owed. That would be a tough one, I think, for another team to take on without getting some relief financially. Chapman, a little bit of a different, I agree, in a different type of lineup where he's not one of your key offensive players, where there's, whatever he does offensively is almost a bonus, not like a necessity. Um, yeah, I think that there would certainly be interest in him. Um, do they want to take the chance? I mean, I guess you could certainly query him and his representatives to see what they're thinking about staying and things like that. He's kind of, for me, he's kind of in the middle of it. Snell, I think that knowing Scott Boras, you know, especially if Blake continues to pitch the way he's pitched the last 4 or 5 times out, he ain't hanging for 1 year. He gets a chance to go get 4 or 5 years, he's leaving.
Right.
So, that could, with the right organization, that could help you a lot in the next few years with the players you could get back.
Yeah.
Remembering something that the great Jimmy Leland, who just went into the Hall of Fame a few days ago, used to say all the time, prospects, what they are, no matter how good they are.
Yeah.
They're minor league players.
Yeah.
Okay. So you got to be careful with that. You've got to really know as best you can, and nobody knows the players like the organization that they're with. You gotta be able to really fix a couple of spots on your club going forward to move Blake. But if they know that he's not coming back, that he's going to be looking for 4, 5, 6 year deal, at a high rate of pay, and doesn't you sense it's not going to be where he's currently at, and maybe you don't have an interest in going that deep. You probably got to make that move, because that's with the right organization on the other side of it. See, I mean, there's a lot of different things people got to think about that fans don't necessarily have to think about. You got to find the right organization that's got some players that you are definitive on that can really help your club going forward. Then you got to make that move. You get a phone call that you can't hang up from. You got to take that chance.
Yeah, and also last year we saw Max Scherzer go from the Mets to the Rangers, and part of the trade was him agreeing to opting in, or whatever it was, to not exercise his opt-out. Is there something like that could take place with Snell, where they say, okay, we're gonna trade you, but part of the trade is it's an extension, or they're adding 3-4 years to his deal?
Yeah, but again, you got to take everything into consideration. And I don't know Blake at all. I know Scott pretty well. You almost on the other side of this. I mean, the general manager is sitting or the president of baseball ops is sitting in the middle of the wheel, and all the spokes coming into the middle of the wheel, he's got to do business with. So as you think about doing that, and a team says, well, do you think he would do an extension? You're going to have to almost know what they're thinking on the other side. And Scott's probably the best there is. So is he going to take less to make a deal? I don't think so. He typically, unless the player tells him otherwise, he typically walks his guys into free agency, especially when their second half has been strong, especially when you got, a couple of big trophies, in the house. So
yeah,
I think that really complicates it. I think a team that is interested in him is going to be interested in the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay. Who could you see if you were putting on your crystal ball? Who would you see? Is it someone with big bucks like the Yankees or the Padres that are Preller willing to take that deal, or is it somebody like the Mets who are competing this year, Baltimore? Anybody in mind you think that would make that move?
Well, it's going to have to be somebody with a rich farm system. You're going to have to fill your need. You're not, teams aren't in business to help other teams. You know, if you have a quality player or pitcher this time of year that you're gonna try and move, you got to think about your own organization. So where are you going to find the prospects? Who's got the prospect capital? Who's in need? You know, you watch every team. Your scouts are watching every contender. Besides every team that may be trading assets to know where they're at. Maybe there's a really good team that their starting pitching is starting to fray a little bit. Their best guys are starting to show a little bit of wear and tear, and they've got a great farm system. Boom, that's who you're calling. That's who you're calling. And that's where you got to start. You can't just, I don't think you can just move him to move him. I think if nobody wants to offer you what you think is the fair value for him, then you hold and you make them pay the price of not having them.
Right. Exactly.
But you gotta make sure that if you're gonna move him, that you're helping your team in 25 and beyond. He's that type of talent.
Yeah, absolutely. Now the Giants Rockies game going on, Matt Chapman just came through with a clutch, bases loaded, 2-out single, maybe upping his value a little bit here at the trade deadline, coming through as he in the clutch, which he struggled this year with runners in scoring position, and the Rockies just proved why they are 30 games below 500. First and second, 2-out, ground ball to McMahon at third base. He charges the ball and runs into, just instead of throwing to first, he tags the runner on second, and the ball pops out of his mitt. And then the bases are loaded. The next pitch, Chapman base hit. So the Rockies, it's just bad things seem to happen to lousy teams, don't they?
Yeah, you are who you are.
Yeah. So now, when you're making a trade, do you have to get, like you mentioned, Scott Boras? Is he involved knowing that the trade is going down, or you just notify him afterwards?
Well, if a player doesn't have a no trade clause, I didn't think it was my business to tell an agent what I was thinking.
Right.
So they'll hear it from the player, they'll read about it, whatever. If it's a no trade, no movement clause, yeah, then of course they're going to be in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But without that clause, I wasn't going to, again, I got to think about the organization.
Right.
In the free agent market, the agent's not thinking about the organization. He's thinking about his client. The GM, quote, the client's the team, the organization, the ownership. So that's what you worry about. No trade, totally different deal. Then you got to bring people up to date. You're going to have to get their approval, their blessing to it. And the agents can play a big role in that and knowing what they know.
Yeah. Now, not putting you in a position to name a player that maybe this has never come out, but that's already known information. What's the best trade that was never made? Sometimes they say the best trades are the trades you never make. Is there a trade that you had somebody that was ready to be dealt, and then something happened where it didn't, fell through, whatever, and then you were afterwards like, wow, glad we didn't move that guy?
I can't think of one. I can't think of one on that end. I can think of deals that I had hoped to make that got stopped on the 1 yard line one time by ownership with Cleveland. CC Sabathia, when he got traded from Cleveland to Milwaukee, we were right in it. In fact, it fell apart in San Francisco. We were playing the Giants that weekend.
Mm.
And that would have probably changed our fortunes. This was a long time ago now. But that's one that got away a little bit. Wasn't allowed to do it, financial reasons. So, but that's the owner's prerogative. They have the right to tell you not doing it.
Yeah. Gilbert Gamboa asks, did you ever negotiate directly with owners like George Steinbrenner?
No. I mean, I always you negotiate with the person you work for. That's almost, every time you have anything of massive financial consequence or prospect consequence, whether, you're always, they're always up to date. They always know what you're thinking and why you're thinking it and what it's going to cost in either prospect capital or finance. Um, the only, and this it wasn't an owner, but I got a call one time from Nolan Ryan, who wanted me to take this player wanted to be traded to the Dodgers late in his career, and I didn't think the pitcher had much left, and Ryan called me and said, "Look, Ned, I'm telling you, you got to get this guy. I said, Ryan, Nolan, and all due respect, I don't see it. I don't see it. That was the only time anybody I can think outside of the GM realm and I had a conversation. There may have been another one or two, but that one stands out a little bit because it was one of the greats of all time, Nolan Ryan.
Yeah. Now, today, with today's internet age, there's sites out there, baseball trade values, and they list every value player. I play with it on the channel and stuff. Is that realistic, those values?
I don't know. It's up to whoever's reading it, who's ever has to make the decision. To put values on players is obviously something people do, especially in the fantasy baseball or any sport eras. But unless you got skin in the game, unless you're really into it and you're saturated with it, not just periodically, but almost every day of the year. In fact, every day of the year, where there's rarely an hour that goes by that you're not thinking about your club, or your minor league team, or your coaches, or your managers, or whatever. You're in a constant thought process. Um, unless that's you, and unless you have something to gain, something to lose, it's easy to do anything. You got skin in the game, totally different. And I don't look at the sites you're referring to, and I'm sure that there's a lot of intellect and a lot of different things that go into it. But there's a lot that goes in to running a baseball operation, far more than people understand, unless they've done it. And I don't mean on a fantasy level. I mean in real life.
Right.
And it's just far more complicated than it looks. And there's your mind is constantly on it, and your mind goes to a lot of different places and a lot of different people, how they're going to react to it. And talking about your own club, basically, and if they're going to help you win games, and if they're the type of player that when you get to the month of October, Cody Ross, for example, in Giant lore, that they're going to be difference makers. They're not the headline grabbing deal or waiver claim or whatever, but they turn out to be difference makers in the biggest games of the year. And every game's important, but the ones that they play in the month of October, they write history for you, one way or the other.
Right. Yes.
Can they do that? Whatever their internet grade is, whatever,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And it may match up, but
Well,
again,
the reason I ask that, because to me, Blake Snell seems like a valuable piece that would bring in to somebody who wants to win and doesn't mind, even if he opts out, they will pay the price. Yet his value on one of these trade values is basically negative because of his contract. And yet you look at the eye test and it says this guy can get us a championship. If, I mean, how much is that worth?
Oh, no doubt. But it is rare because this is, in basketball, sometimes one player can make that much difference.
Right.
In baseball, it's I don't know if there's ever going to be one player that does that. They're going to help you, but I don't think there's the definitive player that is going to take you from out of the playoffs to definitely into playoffs with a chance. I don't think that player is there. I don't anytime. Or you're a playoff team and this player is going to bring you the World Series. Yeah, they might, but you really don't know that. There's so many factors that go into winning baseball games.
Yeah.
It's like when the last play of the game, somebody gives up a walk off or somebody strikes out on a slider away, and that's what everybody thinks about. In the game of baseball, there's dozens of crossroads inside the game where the game can go one way or another. Sometimes teams in the postseason will lose a lead in the eighth or ninth inning, and they'll start getting on the relief pitcher that gave up the run in the ninth. Well, maybe the team that ended up blowing the lead had a chance to add on 4 or 5
Yeah,
runs.
they left 12 runners in scoring position on. They
Yeah.
left them on
So,
base.
there's too many things. I mean, the game is beautiful like that. There's a million things that go into how it goes.
Yeah, you think about it, Ned. Two of the greatest players ever to play the game who donned the Giants uniform, Willie Mays and Barry Bonds, won world championship between them.
There you go. In how many years?
Yeah, like 40.
Yeah. Well, didn't play together. You're talking about
Right.
40 different seasons about it.
Right.
I mean, it's hard. It is hard to win. And
Yeah.
that's, when you look back at what the Giants did in that short period of time, it's phenomenal. I think, I think you have to go back to maybe the early 40s to find a National League team that won that many World Series in that short a period of time.
Right.
I think it was in the early 40s.
Yeah.
So, what they did was phenomenal. Can never be taken for granted because it's hard. There's a lot of great players that have never won the Fall Classic.
Right.
Many. Because again, one player is not going to carry you over the threshold.
True. Very true.
The team will carry you over the threshold.
Right. A couple of questions from the chat here. Vita for Life says, can you give an example of a time a scout fought for someone in the draft and nobody else saw what the scout saw and they ended up being right?
Wow, that is a great question. I'm sure. I can't think off the top of my. That's probably one I'd have to think about, but I'm sure it's happened in my history. But again, you do your homework, and if I had a scout, whether it was draft or trading deadline, that was that definitive on a player, and I knew how to scout thought. Because people think you just scout players when the game starts, till the game ends. You're always scouting a player, but as the leader of the organization, you're also scouting your scouts. You're scouting everybody in your organization. How do they think? If I really knew they knew this situation, knew the player, knew what they were talking about, I'd have to go with the scout. I wouldn't let the player get away if I thought that the scout was definitive, gave us reasons why. I didn't see every player we ever drafted. There's too many of them. So yeah,
Right.
you see a couple of them, maybe a couple more. Sometimes you're seeing players 2 or 3 times that don't even get to you, or whatever. It's a very inexact science. But if I had a scout that was really definitive on a player, and I really knew that this scout always did their homework, and it was not out of character, but it was like their fierceness almost and their belief, I wouldn't let that player get away.
Interesting. Yeah. Good. That's a good question.
You got to know it. That was a great
Yeah.
question. You have
Yeah.
to know everybody that works with you. You got to know all of them because people are different. Some people are going to always say yes. Some people are always going to say no. Some people know pitching better than hitting. Some hitting better than pitching. I would ask my top scouts who were pitching savvy
Dick
about hitters. Oh yeah. And when I was in LA, Aaron Seeley, I would
Yeah.
ask him about hitters I wanted to acquire because you think, well, I'm just going to ask hitters about hitters. No, I wanted to ask really good pitchers, guys who knew how to pitch, like Seeley, who would tell me, you know, this guy is really a good hitter. I'd struggle with this guy. I would have my pitching guys watch hitters. I would have my hitting guys watch pitchers. I would reverse what you typically might
Yeah.
think.
That's a good way to go at it because pitchers know.
To find out. Yeah.
Pitchers know. Yeah. Because they're going to give you a much more honest, probably evaluation because they're going to be able to say, hey, man, like you said, I'd struggle against that guy, or hey, he's got a weakness right up here. I'd strike this guy out every time.
I traded a player who was high up on a few publication lists. And when I traded the player, not everybody, a lot of media said, well, what was he thinking trading this guy? Yeah, the guy was lighting it up at AA and AAA. And it was Aaron Seeley at the last minute. I said, Aaron, you've known this guy for 3 years, 4 years. Tell me. And he says, he'll never make it. He'll never make it. I've seen people try to instruct. I've seen people try to work with him. He's got a hole on the inner half of his swing. He ain't closing it up. And once he starts getting paid, he'll never close it up if he lasts that long. And I traded him. And sure enough, this player maybe had 200 at bats in the big leagues.
Interesting. Here's another question from Eric L. Says, does Ned think the third wild card is good or bad for the league?
I think it's great. I think that the more teams that get a chance, the better. And I'll look at it a little bit deeper too, Eric. The 1994 World Series was lost in part because of trying to have parity in the league, and there needed to be revenue sharing. There needed to be a luxury tax, no cap, but they needed to bring some parity to the league. But as you look at the game today, the expanse from the lowest payroll teams to the highest payroll teams has probably never been greater last 5 years. So, there's still this great disparity. So if you have a team that can compete and, you can go back to the Giants way back in 1993, they won 103 games and went home. Right. So, did that team deserve a chance? So by doing the extra team, yeah, it gives a fan base hope. It gives the organization a chance to win against some of the behemoths in the league that are spending 200 million, 250 plus. It gives other teams a chance. Look at AZ a year ago.
Yeah.
They went to the World Series. This time of the year, who thought that was going to happen?
Right.
And as you go back, it can happen. It can happen. So I think giving the teams a chance, I think it's great. It hurts the trade deadline a little bit because some of the teams that need to win and need to get to that postseason because it hasn't happened for a while, they're not moving anybody.
Right. But it does make it can be a difficult decision because in a lot of ways you've got to look at your team. And as you said at the beginning of this, you got to know your team and know what they're capable of and what they've seen after, we played almost 110 games. You got to know where you're at because right now you have teams that are within 3-4 games of that third wild card. And it's possible they can make it, but it's also could be if you don't make it and you trade away some of your better prospects for rentals or whatever, and they you just blew up. You set your organization back another 4 or 5 years.
Minimum. I don't think you can do that. I think you got to sit tight. And, I would, when I got to July, and, your team inside out, the personalities of your players. And there was always a handful of veterans who had been around for a long time, signed them or traded for them or drafted them or whatever. And they were, maybe not vocal leaders, but they'd been there for a while. And so they knew the dynamic of it. And if we were like so, and we hadn't played up to our potential, if I thought there was more there that we weren't quite there for whatever reason, injury, lack of concentration, performance that was below average for a player or two, I'd have an impromptu conversation with 4 or 5 guys and say, hey, look, my personality. I'm gonna, give me a reason. Give me a reason to go make a move. Don't make me vacillate on it, because if we're like this, this is the group. The cavalry's not coming through the door. This is the group. Give me a reason. And sure enough, many times, the word would spread. Hey, he's looking to help us, but we got to start picking this up a little bit. We can't keep going, 3 and 4 over 7 or 5 and 5 over 10, and we're under 500. You got to get to 500 to begin with. And right. So many times, I tell them, Sabes did the same thing. Hey, we want to help. We want to bring somebody through that door that everybody knows and goes, oh, now we got even a better chance. But you got to give me a chance to give you a chance.
Right.
So you got to have that conversation from time to time. And you got to pick the right guys. You got to know your team, and you got to know where your leaders are at, and you got to know who understands it. And this isn't something you can just do on the spur of the moment, or you do, at the All-Star break for the first time. No, this is stuff that you're constantly in this conversational track. You're constantly learning about them. They're learning about you. So they understand it. They're just kind of looking for affirmation at the end, because everybody kind of communicates in a way that people know where you're at, and you know where they're at. Sometimes that's very helpful.
Yeah, I can see that.
The right guys in the room, that it's very, very helpful.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I was looking here through the chat. Somebody had another question in here for you, and I got to see if I can find it, because so many people are moving in the chat. Okay, here it is. Can you elaborate why baseball shouldn't have a cap? He says, I think it definitely should have a floor. Meaning teams like Oakland, who have no payroll, and yet they get revenue sharing, right? So, yeah, I think there should be a floor too, Vita. What's your thoughts on this, Ned?
Well, it's another great question. First off, anything of this nature has got to be negotiated with the union. You can't just put a cap in. My guess, if owners could put a cap in, they would have did it 30 years ago. They just can't do that. It's got to be collectively bargained. And, that they have a luxury tax, and that they have, that leads into revenue sharing is about the best it's going to do. It's one of the only sports, I've been working in hockey 6 or 7 years now. And it's one of the drastic differences when you have a hard cap like you do in the NHL versus when you just have a luxury tax. But, I don't think there'll ever be a cap. I don't think that'll ever happen. Union is too strong. They're not going for it. And by virtue of that, there can't be a floor. Because the union's thought process, and I'm not quoting anybody here, I'm just going off of what I've read or what I've heard through the years, by instilling a floor, you almost have to have a ceiling.
Oh, I see. Makes sense.
So,
yeah, because my thought was the floor would help the players get, yes. But it would help the lower end players, but maybe hurt the stars.
Yes. Yes. The closest I think I've seen, and I could be incorrect on some of this, but the closest I've seen is when there were a handful of teams, not even a handful, maybe 3 or 4 teams, to your point, Danny, that were getting revenue sharing dollars and spending less on payroll than they were getting on revenue sharing. So that's the union balked at that in a heartbeat. But that's and my recollection could be wrong. I'm not telling you I got it all wired here, but I think that that's part of the thought process on that.
What do you think of a lot of the newer, younger guys are coming up and they're getting signed to, buying out their arbitration years, seeing guys like Jackson Churio and some others. He just came to my head right now, but several players, the Braves did it quite a bit with Acuna and Albies and Riley. And how do you feel about that? Do you think that's, as a GM, is that would you prefer to have a lot of your younger guys sign for years, or would you rather see them prove it?
Well, usually, like most of my answers, Danny, there's more to it than meets the eye. You have to be, yeah, sure. In theory, you'd want to do it with all your young players, but you have to know what is the security going to do for this player. Some players will play relentlessly for $1. Okay. Some players, once they start getting paid a lot, that's as good as they're ever going to be.
Wow.
So you got to be careful with it. Cleveland did it years ago with great success in the John Hart era. And Alex in Atlanta has done it very well. You have to know who you're signing, not just the talent, but really what it's going to do. That's why a lot of times when you see a player sign a free agent contract, for 6, 7, 8, 9 years, 10 years, and the money in the 30 million a year range plus, they're never better.
Yeah.
How many times have you seen a free agent whose best years come after the deal?
I've seen one that I know of that comes to my mind.
Okay. How many free agents have you seen?
Quite a few.
Okay.
Yeah. I think maybe the best signing that has ever been done in baseball, one of them had to be Barry Bonds in 93.
Oh, yeah.
3 million for 7 years, and everybody was screaming.
You won't have anybody better than that one. You're right. But that doesn't always happen.
Right. Yeah.
So,
very rare. But
it's funny, as I look back on it, the most, not all, but most free agent deals, you're paying for what's happened more than you're going to pay for what's going to happen.
Right.
And that's why in every GM's tombstone there's a list of guys that, we're so happy they signed this player, and then 2 years later, what was the GM thinking when they signed this player?
Yeah. Didn't Willie Mays, didn't he only have 1-year contracts for almost his entire career?
I don't know. It's a possibility.
Because you look back at the back of a baseball card in the 60s and 70s.
Oh yeah.
And you could pretty much say, oh, this guy's going to hit 305. Nowadays, guys hit 300 in the next year. I'm thinking like Jeff McNeil, for example, wins a batting title. The guy's barely above the Mendoza line for the most of the year. How does that happen?
It's there's many things I look at. I love the sport, and I'm always looking at it in one way or another. The two things that I'm taken aback by are, you got so many guys hitting 230, 220, 210, 200. There used to be one guy hitting 210, 220. It was your shortstop who could flat out pick it. And so he was going to save you a bunch of runs and play in the middle of the field. But now you got teams, even really good teams, that have got 3 or 4 guys hitting, 230, 240. at the high end.
Right.
And the other thing is, how many guys are on the IL? Oh
Yeah.
my goodness. I was going to count this up and post something on it a couple of weeks ago, and I just didn't want to be agonizing over what every GM would be agonizing over, how many guys are on that list. But you
Yeah.
have, years, and I'm going to sound like I'm 1,000 years old now. Years ago, you had one trainer. You had one guy, one trainer for
Right.
25 guys.
Now you have 3 or 4.
You got more than that. You've got probably a staff of 7
Oh
or
yeah,
8
you got a staff. Yeah, that's true. You got
conditioning people. You got all kinds of people. And players, back in the day, used to sometimes get jobs in the wintertime to help support their income. There's very few players
right.
with a job in the off
Yeah.
season.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
They're
they used
working
to.
out. They take a month off and they get to Thanksgiving and they're working out.
Yeah.
And they're all on, all these guys are on the IL. It's like every day you watch the bottom line on one of the networks, and a player of prominence is going on the IL. How could
Oh,
all these guys be hurt all the time?
I don't know, and it's a hamstring constantly. More hamstrings.
Ay, ay, ay.
I don't know what's happening with these guys,
I mean,
but
there's teams with 10, 15 guys on the list.
yeah,
You're starting with 26. So
yeah,
you're
it's
going to have 15 of them at some point in time going to be on the list?
it really is unbelievable. I'm just shocked. Like our good buddy Los, who's part of our show here, and he couldn't make it today, but he says, "Preach, Ned." We discussed this ad nauseum. 300 plus hitters and complete games by pitchers are getting more and more scarce. Yeah,
Well, complete games, forget about it. It ain't happening.
yeah,
It ain't happening. I think I may have mentioned this on your show or Larry's show one time. Sandy Koufax, the last 2 years of his career, and then he left the game because of elbow issues. That if they had Tommy John surgery, he could have gotten a surgery probably and continued on. He threw 27 complete games, both the next to the last year and the last year. 27.
wow,
There's been a few years ago, I think there were 27 in the National League. It's probably less now. The entire league had as many complete games as one guy that had a bad elbow.
yeah, yeah.
It's not happening.
It's not.
The game is going to be 6 innings going forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yesterday, the Giants had a traditional doubleheader. And I remember the day when Wilbur Wood with the White Sox pitched both games
Oh,
of
yeah.
a doubleheader.
Oh, yeah.
He started both games. Yeah.
I'll
And
tell you, and I'll leave the players out of it. So Sandy comes in to talk to the Dodgers in spring trading. I had him come in and address the club. And I was sitting between 2 pitchers, really smart guys. I mean, like students of the game, knew how to pitch, had great stuff, had really above average careers. And Joe, or I can't remember if Joe was addressing the team, Torrey, or it was Donnie Mattingly, was going to introduce Sandy. And they start reading off how many innings he pitched in a year and how many strikeouts he had in a year. And these 2 guys, I'm sitting between them, they look at each other and they go, what did he say? That can't be right. And they're looking at me, he goes, what's he reading? And I said, no, that's accurate.
about
Over
380.
Yeah, over 300 innings, over 300 strikeouts. And you're not talking about guys that couldn't hit at that point in time. You're talking about some of the greatest Hall of Famers of all time they were pitching against.
Yeah.
You weren't pitching against this era of 210, 220, 230. No, you were pitching against, the Aarons, the Mazes, the McCoveys, the Ernie Bankses, Billy Williams, on and on, like Clemente. Just, some of the greats of the game.
Well,
But that's
let's close with this question. What, in your opinion, and it's just strictly your opinion, the best decade of baseball?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that I could pinpoint. There's been, in my lifetime, there's been many. And I think, when I look back at the players I saw as a kid and that I saw as a young baseball executive, you know, there were many guys that were Hall of Fame caliber. I'm talking in the 60s and the 70s. I think every era has had a lot to celebrate. Every decade has had a lot to celebrate. I don't know that I could pick one. The game today with the pitch clock has been much improved. But again, you got 220, 210, like we just said. No complete games. The hit and run taken out of the game. Stolen bases coming back a little bit. That this era right here, right now, might be the one that sometimes I think could be better, more exciting. Could be different, but it's not. So you live with it. You watch it. You love it anyway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, growing up, I started watching ball in the late '60s, so the '70s were and the '80s, early '80s were very memorable to me. Just I remember the Jackrabbits of the St. Louis Cardinals.
Oh yeah,
just stealing with Whitey Herzog that team, and Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee, and they had Tommy Herr, the second baseman.
Yes, and had hardly any home runs.
Yeah. It was just amazing to watch. And even though I couldn't stand that team because they used to beat the Giants pretty good back in that day, but it was fun baseball. And you had Mel Allen doing baseball This Week in Baseball every Saturday morning. I'd wake up with that, and that was all we got to see. We didn't get to see all the games.
No.
So it meant so much more. You get to see these highlights. And I was telling people in the chat last night, I just grew up on the sporting green. It was like I knew every stat of every player because I just took time to just read that stuff and just remembered watching all these different teams and collecting all the baseball cards. And it was just fun. But I didn't use the cards and put them away as mint condition. I didn't think about it being an investment. I was reading them and looking at them and
at the same time. Yep.
Yeah. Well, Giants are in the bottom of the eighth, leading 5-3. The Rockies just left bases loaded in the top of the eighth. So we'll let you guys get back to the last inning of the game, see if the Giants get a 4-game sweep. I want to thank Ned today for joining us. And it's always great to have you, Ned. People love having you on the show, love to get your knowledge of the game and hear you just talk baseball. It's great to have you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Danny, and thanks for everybody listening in tonight and for the questions. Great questions.
Yeah, so guys, we'll be back at 4:30. And Ned, we'll have to get you back on later. And thanks, everybody, for joining. We will see you back here at 4:30. Giants Rockies postgame show. 4:30 today. Take care, everybody.